Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Monday, June 3rd, 2024. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today. Netanyahu Aide says that Biden's ceasefire proposal is not a good deal. So on Friday, something unexpected happened. President Biden came out and gave a speech unveiling this ceasefire proposal for Gaza, and he kind of framed it as an Israeli proposal. But then seeing Israel's reaction, it seems like they certainly have not agreed to everything outlined in this proposal for the ceasefire deal. And basically what it is it's a three-phase deal. The first phase would be a 6-week ceasefire, initial hostage and prisoner exchange with some other things like Israel withdrawing from populated areas in Gaza. And during that time, they would negotiate a permanent ceasefire, according to Biden. And then the second phase, there would be another hostage and prisoner exchange, and that's when the Israeli withdrawal from Gaza would happen. And then the third phase would be the start of a reconstruction of Gaza. So Biden made this pretty dramatic speech. He said it's time for an end to the war. Israel and Hamas, should both accept this. But Israel's reaction, Netanyahu's reaction, has not been very hopeful that there will be any kind of deal coming out of this. So there's been a few reactions. So I'll get into a few of them in this story. So on Sunday, a senior advisor to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu criticized the Gaza ceasefire proposal put forward by President Biden, while also insisting that Israel was not rejecting the deal. So they're kind of speaking out of two sides of their mouth. Biden outlined the details on Friday, as I mentioned. So Ophir Falk, he's Netanyahu's top foreign policy advisor. He told the Sunday Times that Biden had made a political speech for whatever reasons. And, you could tell Biden was trying to do something. One thing that's interesting is it was, I believe it was Friday afternoon in the U.S., so Friday night in Israel. So it was basically on the Sabbath. And when you might not see comments from Israeli officials, but Netanyahu did end up releasing a statement the next day on Saturday. So in his speech, Biden said that it was time for the war to end, but the next day, Netanyahu released a statement calling the idea of a permanent ceasefire before Israel achieved its goal of destroying Hamas a non-starter. So Falk reaffirmed Netanyahu's position on Sunday. He said, quote, "There are a lot of details to be worked out, and that includes there will not be a permanent ceasefire until all our objectives are met," end quote. So Falk also claimed Israel was not rejecting the proposal, which he called, quote, "a deal we agreed to. It's not a good deal, but we dearly want the hostages released, all of them," end quote. But he added that Israel's conditions, quote, "have not changed. The release of the hostages and the destruction of Hamas as a genocidal terrorist organization," end quote. So, again, you see him saying that they kind of approved the deal in a way, but also just rejecting the whole, the main part of it, which is a commitment to work toward a permanent ceasefire. And Netanyahu is under pressure from within his own government to reject Biden's proposal. You have Israeli Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich and National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir threatening to resign and bring down the coalition government if Netanyahu accepts the ceasefire deal. So this is not a surprise. Smotrich said on Saturday, quote, "I just spoke with the Prime Minister and made it clear that I will not be a part of a government that agrees to the proposed outline and ends the war without destroying Hamas and bringing back all the hostages," end quote. So Hamas, their response, they put out a statement saying that they viewed what Biden proposed on Friday positively. So they had a positive response to it. A senior U.S. official told Haaretz that the proposal was nearly identical to the one that Hamas accepted from Egypt a few weeks ago. if you remember, that was actually on the day that Israel launched its invasion of Rafah as it was going to make its move. Hamas came out and said, hey, we accepted a ceasefire deal. And then Israel said, well, we didn't agree to that one. That was they accused Egypt of kind of acting on their own in making this proposal to Hamas. So nothing came of that. And that was, you actually saw Palestinians in Rafah, celebrating in the streets that a ceasefire, they thought there might have been a ceasefire, and then Israel launched its attack. So hopefully something comes out of this, but it's not looking very good. And I think Netanyahu's interest above everything is to stay in power. And that means placating Smotrich and Ben Gvir. And of course, Netanyahu has his own reasons to continue this horrific slaughter and starvation of Palestinians in Gaza. But we'll see how, it just didn't look good for Biden. You had Biden come out and say, oh, this is an Israeli proposal. And then the next day, the headline was Netanyahu calls a permanent ceasefire a non-starter. So it seems like from Biden's standpoint, this was probably a political move and maybe an electoral move, trying to make it look like he's doing something to placate some of the Democrats and people within his administration who are very opposed to all the support he's been giving Israel. All right, so the next one here, Smotrich threatens to turn the West Bank into ruins like Gaza. So Israeli Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich has threatened Palestinians in the West Bank that Israel could turn their cities into ruins like the Gaza Strip. So Smotrich's threats come as violence from Israeli soldiers and settlers in the West Bank against Palestinians continues to escalate. Since October 7th, over 500 Palestinians have been killed in the territory. So this was a video that he posted on May 30th. He addressed what he called neighbors beyond the fence in several West Bank cities. He said, quote, "We will turn you into ruins like in the Gaza Strip if the terror you are inflicting on the settlements continues. Terrorism against the citizens of Israel must stop," end quote. Of course, any sort of this, I think there was some like gunfire near an Israeli settlement. No Israeli settlers were killed or wounded or anything. But of course, any sort of resistance from the Palestinians is a reaction to these settlers encroaching and trying to steal their land and kicking people out of their homes. So Smotrich, he is the leader of the religious Zionism party, and he is a settler himself. And he's been known for many years as an extremist who openly calls for the expulsion of Palestinians and very clear that he wants Israel to annex the entire West Bank. And he also holds a minister position in the defense ministry that gives him the power to expand settlements in the West Bank. It essentially makes him like the occupation governor of the West Bank. Smotrich and other members of the Netanyahu government are not shy about their desire to annex the West Bank and push Palestinians out. And this was a key priority of this Netanyahu government, this coalition government that came into power in December 2022. They put out a statement saying that they were going to make settlement expansion a priority with the goal of eventually annexing the West Bank. And after they came in, violence really spiked in the West Bank, stepping up raids against Palestinians and settlers more emboldened. All right, so the next one here, Netanyahu accepts invitation to address Congress. So on Saturday, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said he accepted an invitation from congressional leaders to address a joint session of Congress in Washington. Netanyahu wrote on X that he was thrilled to have the opportunity to address the House and the Senate, and said he would present the truth about Israel's onslaught in Gaza. So Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer joined House Speaker Mike Johnson in inviting Netanyahu, despite Schumer previously labeling Netanyahu an obstacle to peace and calling for Israeli elections. Johnson first floated the idea of inviting Netanyahu a couple months ago. And at that time, Schumer said that the U.S.-Israel relationship transcends any one president or prime minister. So he's still super, pro-Israel and everything, even though he came out against Netanyahu. A source told The Hill that Netanyahu's address is expected to take place as soon as the next 8 weeks or soon after the August recess. So Senator Bernie Sanders and a few Democrats have come out against the plan to host Netanyahu. Sanders said, quote, Benjamin Netanyahu is a war criminal. He should not be invited to address a joint meeting of Congress. I certainly will not attend, end quote. So Netanyahu has a history of controversial addresses to Congress. Will actually be the fourth time that he gives an address to Congress. In 2015, he delivered a speech opposing the Iran nuclear deal. And that was very contentious at the time because you had the Obama administration. You have a foreign leader coming over and railing against something that the current U.S. administration is pursuing. And he also played a key role in pressuring the Trump administration to abandon the Iran nuclear deal, known as the JCPOA. And then the one thing I always mention is in 2002, now this is when he wasn't prime minister, and he testified before Congress. It wasn't like an address, but he testified, and pushed the false narrative that Saddam had WMDs and that he was, pursuing nuclear weapons. He said, quote, there is no question whatsoever that Saddam is seeking, is working, is advancing towards the development of nuclear weapons, end quote. And he also said, regime change is going to be good. There's going to be great things are going to happen in the region as a result of it. So that's who Netanyahu is. All right, so the next one here, Israeli forces are operating in most areas of Rafah. So this article is from Kyle Anzalone. He wrote this up on Friday. On Friday, the Israeli military said that it had expanded operations to the central area of Rafah. And the Israeli military confirmed that its forces are now fighting throughout most of Rafah. They're all over the city. And Biden claimed that if Israeli forces attacked population centers in the city without a plan for the civilians living there, it would cross his red line. But of course, it appears that he has no red line. So Israeli troops continue to push into the city, killing hundreds in the process and forcing over 1 million to flee. And Biden officials have asserted that Israel, this operation still hasn't crossed the red line, even after that massacre at the tent camp in Rafah that was committed with U.S.-provided bombs. And the assault on Rafah has pushed the overall death toll to over 36,000, including tens of thousands of women and children. The IDF has also sustained losses in Rafah, increasing the number of soldiers killed to 289 since October 7th. So the next story here is another one from Kyle. Nearly 40% of Rafah buildings damaged or destroyed. This article is at the Libertarian Institute. So satellite imagery shows that 40% of the buildings in the southern region of the Gaza Strip have now been damaged or destroyed by the Israeli onslaught. Before Israel began its assault on Rafah, it served as a refuge for over 1 million Palestinians. So this is satellite imagery that was published, that was analyzed by Planet Labs and published in Financial Times, and it showed all the damage and destruction to Rafah. Again, this idea that this is some limited operation is just not true. Just because they're not dropping the 2,000-pound bombs on residential buildings like they did in other cities does not mean that this is not a major operation, and the U.S. continues to support it. All right, so the next one here, Israeli airstrikes hit Aleppo and 12 are reported killed. So Israeli airstrikes hit targets near the Syrian city of Aleppo early Monday morning, resulting in heavy casualties. A military source told Syria's news agency, quote, the Israeli enemy launched an air attack from the direction of southeastern Aleppo, targeting some sites in the vicinity of Aleppo. The aggression led to a number of martyrs and some material losses, end quote. So I didn't say how many people were killed, but they said a number of people were killed. And then the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, which is based in the UK, they're the only ones putting out a casualty number right now. They said that 12 pro-Iran fighters were killed, and that's a term that they use to describe the Iraqi Shia militias that operate in Syria. Although they did say that some of the dead were Syrian nationals, so they could just be regular Syrian military. And they said that the attack targeted a factory in the town of Hayyan, north of Aleppo. I think the death toll might actually be higher. I saw a bunch of people saying on Twitter that 17 were killed, but I couldn't nail down what the source was, and I ran out of time. So we'll see. This death toll might rise, but these seem like pretty big airstrikes. And this attack came a few days after Israel bombed the coastal Syrian city of Bani-Yas, killing a girl and 10 other civilians. On the same day, Israeli strikes hit central Syria and reportedly killed 5 Shia fighters. Very frequent again. The Israeli airstrikes in Syria have become very frequent after there was that brief lull following the Israeli bombing of the Iranian consulate in Damascus. All right, so the next one here. Israel kills 2 shepherds and wounds 16 children in Lebanon. This article is from Jason Ditz. Israeli forces dramatically escalated airstrikes against southern Lebanon over the weekend, claiming to have hit 40 military targets over the past 72 hours. Despite the claim, civilians appear to have overwhelmingly borne the brunt of the strikes. On Saturday, strikes hit villages ranged across the southern border. Israel attacked the village of Siddiqine, located near the city of Tyre, and wounded some 16 children the ages of between 4 and 14. The National News Agency also reported attacks on several other villages in which at least 7 additional people were wounded on Saturday. And then on Sunday, Israeli forces attacked a home in the southern village of Hula, killing 2 brothers who were working as shepherds. Locals say that the men used to sell sheep's milk to neighboring villages in the area. So again, a lot of civilians have been killed by Israel in Lebanon, a lot of civilian infrastructure damage, and it looks like they really launched some heavy strikes this weekend. All right, so the next one here, NATO shrugs off Putin's warning about strikes in Russia. Of course. So NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg on Friday shrugged off warnings from Russian President Vladimir Putin against NATO countries allowing Ukraine to strike Russian territory with Western weapons. Stoltenberg said, quote, "This is nothing new. It has been the case for a long time that every time NATO allies are providing support to Ukraine, President Putin is trying to threaten us to not do that," end quote. Stoltenberg's comments came after the U.S. and several other NATO countries gave Ukraine the green light to strike Russian territory near Kharkiv with their weapons. The step marks a significant escalation in the proxy war and could provoke a major response from Moscow, despite Stoltenberg downplaying the risk. I mean, we've seen this. They always tend to do this. Putin warned that there would be serious consequences, and Russia warned the UK that if British missiles are used on Russian territory, Russia would hit British military sites. So very serious warnings from Russia. And Russia has already, significantly escalated its war in response to Ukrainian attacks on its territory. If you look over the past 2 years, you see this pattern. Back in October 2022, the bombing, the first time that the Crimean Bridge, the Kerch Bridge, which connects Crimea to the Russian mainland, the first time that was bombed by Ukraine, Russia responded by launching major missile strikes on Ukraine's infrastructure, energy infrastructure, and things like that. And this was the first time that they did that they launched, major coordinated strikes on infrastructure across Ukraine. They didn't do that before then, and it was a direct response to that. They made that very clear. And then if you look at this offensive in Kharkiv, Putin says this is a response to the Ukrainian attacks in Belgorod, the Russian oblast that borders Kharkiv. And so you see this direct correlation. And again, I've said this before. People like Stoltenberg, people like Blinken, Lindsey Graham, they don't feel the consequences of these escalations. It's the Ukrainians who have to deal with it. So they don't care. And the question is there going to be a point where the NATO and the Western countries do feel the consequences? I think a real possibility would be if Russia knows where some of these, Western troops are in Ukraine, the British ones that are there, and if France sends this big deployment that they're planning now, I wouldn't be surprised if we see Russia target them inside Ukraine. I think that's a real possibility. So this is just really dangerous territory that we are entering here, and they just shrug it off and say, don't worry about it. All right, the next one here, the Netherlands says that Ukraine can use F-16s to strike inside Russia. This is another article from Kyle that he wrote Friday. The Dutch foreign minister said that Amsterdam does not object to Kiev using F-16s to strike targets inside Russia once the advanced aircraft reach Ukraine. So the announcement is a major escalation because F-16s are capable of carrying nuclear weapons. And this is something that Lavrov has noted, the Russian foreign minister. And, these are nuclear-capable jets, nuclear-capable weapons that they're giving to Ukraine, and they're saying that they could strike Russia with. So this is very provocative. So the Dutch foreign minister said, quote, "If you have the right to self-defense, there are no borders for the use of weapons. This is a general principle," end quote. So this seems to be the attitude now, the prevailing attitude among NATO countries is, let them hit Russia with whatever we give them. All right, so the next one here, the U.S. bombs Somalia, says that 3 ISIS fighters are killed. So U.S. Africa Command has announced that it launched an airstrike in northeastern Somalia on Friday and claimed that it killed 3 members of ISIS. That's right. ISIS is apparently in Somalia. I know that they've targeted them before, like a year and a half ago, and there's only believed to be like a few hundred ISIS fighters in northern Somalia, in Puntland, which is like a semi-autonomous region of Somalia. So the command said that that's where the strike was launched, near the city, in a very remote region, about 50 miles southeast of Busasko, which is a coastal city on the Gulf of Aden. Again, in Puntland. So AFRICOM said that its initial assessment found 3 ISIS militants were killed and no civilians were harmed. However, we always have to keep in mind that AFRICOM specifically is notorious for undercounting civilian casualties, especially in Somalia, where things are really, we don't know what's really happening on the ground in many of these cases, especially a strike like this against a remote desert region of Somalia. We really don't know. We're not just going to take the U.S. military's word for it. They didn't share any more information about the strike, so it's unclear if these 3 ISIS members who were allegedly killed were the only intended targets. They didn't say if they killed any kind of leader or anything, just no details, just bombed Somalia and put out a little press release. So this is the first time that AFRICOM announced an airstrike in Somalia since March. Although it is unclear, we don't know if they are reporting every U.S. airstrike in Somalia. The U.S. typically targets al-Shabaab in the southern areas of Somalia, where the U.S.-backed Mogadishu-based government's forces operate on the ground. AFRICOM said that the latest airstrike against ISIS was coordinated with the federal government of Somalia, which refers to the government based in Mogadishu. So Somalia is, you have Puntland, where the peninsula-looking area of Somalia sticks out, and then to the west of that is Somaliland, which is, acts as its own country. And then the southern area, a good portion of it's controlled. I'm not sure how it's broken down exactly, but a lot of it is controlled by the government out of Mogadishu. But there's also some territory controlled by al-Shabaab, and then there's a lot of territory, rural areas controlled by different tribes that aren't part of the government. So anyway, I was just looking up some stuff about Puntland and the situation in Somalia, and they actually recently withdrew their recognition of the federal government over disagreements about changes to the Constitution. So they're acting kind of independently as well. All right, so the last story here, Chinese defense minister says Taiwan separatists will be crushed. So this article is from the South China Morning Post. And China's new defense minister took a tough line on Taiwan and a veiled swipe at the Philippines in his debut at an international security forum on Sunday. Addressing defense officials and international observers at the Shangri-La dialogue in Singapore, Deng Jun repeated Beijing's warnings against Taiwanese independence and international support for it, saying Beijing would not allow any country to create war or chaos in the Asia-Pacific region. He said, quote, "Whoever dares to split Taiwan from China will be crushed to pieces and invite their own destruction," end quote. So this is not just a warning to William Lai, the new Taiwanese president, and the DPP. This is also a warning to what he calls in this speech and in the questions that he answered, the external forces that are stoking what China calls Taiwanese independence. And those external forces are mainly the U.S. So this is all a warning to the U.S. as well. So his appearance at the high-profile security forum comes 6 months into his new job and 2 weeks after the inauguration of Taiwanese leader William Lai Ching-te, a man Beijing has branded a troublemaker and a destroyer of cross-strait peace. Dong said Beijing was committed to peaceful reunification with Taiwan, but the prospect was being undermined by Taiwan separatists and external forces. Again, clearly, obviously referring to external forces, saying that they are pushing Taiwan into danger and making trouble in the South China Sea under the excuse of freedom of navigation. Clearly talking about the U.S. He said, quote, "We will not allow hegemony and power politics to harm the Asia-Pacific, nor will we allow geopolitical conflicts, cold wars, or hot wars to be introduced in the Asia-Pacific. Nor will we allow any country or any force to create war and chaos here," end quote. So a lot of very clear warnings aimed at the U.S. All right, so that is it for the news for today. Please go check out our Viewpoints, one from Megan Russell, mapping the parallels of U.S. conflict from Vietnam to the war on China. One from Jeffrey Sachs, presidents who gamble with nuclear Armageddon. One from Jonathan Cook, the media used a single comma to distract from a ruling to stop genocide. One from Patrick McFarlane, integrated deterrence means provoking China, about how this so-called deterrence, what they call deterrence, flooding Taiwan with weapons and all this stuff, is really just provocation. Spotlight from Kelly Vlahos, we did it too, the ugliest excuse for Israel. So please go check all of that out. I hope everyone had a good weekend. You could always support this show by liking, subscribing. All that stuff helps out. Commenting, which many of you do. I appreciate it. Share the show. Tell your friends about antiwar.com. I will be back tomorrow with some more news. Thanks for listening.